So, shall we talk about initiation then?
Sounds good.
Tell me a bit about why it's so important that people have initiations into adulthood.
Having been a therapist for all these years working with young people, what I realize is they have never been asked who they are, what they stand for, what they believe in. They have no idea how to define what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be in a relationship. They're very quick to answer the things that are wrong with themselves. And because the most basic driving force for human beings is to please other people and to be a part of things, and the greatest fear is to be forgotten, then people who don't have a compass are easily led into the problems that we're seeing. In the United States, 25% of all women in college are sexually assaulted. 30% of all male and female students could be assessed to be alcoholic or a drug addict. And that comes out of this inability for a person to hold their own key, to be able to say, this is what I stand for. This is how I want my life to be. What initiation does is at that time, when someone's between the age of 12 and 22 or 23, they are individuating. They're trying to find out who they are. But if they don't have a fairy godmother, like in the movies, then there's a really good chance that they'll never discover who they are, and that's how they can be led astray. So a lot of people do pretty well, probably a majority, but there's a significant number that do poorly, that don't have to suffer the violence that they suffer, violence to themselves, violence to others, violence to nature. The violence we're seeing in nature comes out of the uninitiated person. So initiation is a way for older people to assist younger people in an extended process to discover who they are and how they want to walk in the world. Without that, there's an absence of what we would call the sacred, and we see the selfishness that occurs.
And what about for people who missed that boat and say are over 23 now? What is there anything they can do to?
Well, there's something I've come to believe. At first, I didn't want to believe it, but something I've come to believe. The human brain reaches final formation, age 23, 24, 25. And that seems to be the part of the brain where judgment is formed. That between the age of 12 and when that brain comes to its full power, people are able to be wired to not just learn things, but embody things, to have it become part of their physical, spiritual, emotional, intellectual self. What I've come to believe is that after that point, you can teach people things, and it can become part of a knowledge base, can become part of a behavior base. The difference is that it's something you still have to work at, which isn't bad, but it's something you have to work at. Whereas when something is part of your nature, then it is just natural. It's something that is you versus something you've kind of learned and are trying to make part of you. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So initiation, people think that in a week or 3 weeks or even 3 months that they can be initiated. We have some funny ideas of initiation. There's a man by the name of Prochaska, and he tells us there are 5 stages of change: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation for change, change, and maintenance. And that with something that you don't know and or something that you deeply value, it takes you upwards of 2 years to fully and deeply embody change. So again, if we use the example of you have a freshman class at a college who we'll say they're all 18 years old, for 18 years have been fed the belief that women are toys. That no means yes and all of these other things. And so colleges have this sexual assault problem, and they bring in a speaker for $3,000, and the speaker stands up front and says, guys, women are not toys. That's a bad thing to do. So don't hurt women. I mean, that's the basic gist of the 1-hour speech. And what we expect is that all of the men will leave there going, oh my God, that was so earth-shaking for me. Yes, women are not toys, and I will never think that way about women again or harm them. You know, it's somewhat ridiculous that we think these 1-hour programs are going to make any difference when we know it takes 4 years to make a biologist or 4 years to make a chemist or an engineer. You know, Bio 1, Bio 2, Bio 3, Chem 1, 3, 4. But when it comes to human nature, we'll do a speech and we'll put a lot of money into better policemen. We'll put a lot of money into billboards. We'll put a lot of money into judicial systems. They're always dealing with symptoms. What initiation does, it deals with the root of a potential problem. So it is working with something before it even becomes a problem. Once something is a problem, now you're dealing with symptoms. Now you're dealing with the effects of the problem. So it takes at least a year or more to do an appropriate and deep and true initiation. It takes time, effort, but in the end, you have such change at a root level.
And that process, does it require a sort of spiritual foundation? I mean, so I'm speaking from the UK, and we've lost our ancestral traditions to a large extent, whereas in the States, you guys still have traditions that are, with varying degrees, still functioning. I wonder how can that initiation process be done as a process in itself, or do you need that foundation of a spiritual ancestral tradition from your land or from your place?
The key is to take that word spiritual and look at that word. And the word has to do with breath. I practice the Lakota tradition. I'm, as you can see, one of the whitest human beings on earth. And yet the Lakota people have said, well, yes, you can practice these things. We'll teach them to you in depth. And they have words like Wichone, Inipi, Wonia. And if you were to take all of those words, you find there's a root word, N-I, which N-I. So again, Inipi, Wichoni, Wonia, has to do with smoke, the building that you do a sweat lodge in, steam, life. It comes from the root word life. And life has to do with breath. And spirituality has to do with your connection to the breath, to your own breath, to the breath of other people, to the breath of nature. And when we realize that we are all connected, we are all interrelated, that's what an initiated person really deeply, truly understands, and that's what they make their decisions on, is, am I creating life or am I destroying life? Dag Hammarskjöld, who was a Swedish diplomat, used to say that phrase with every word, with every thought, with every action. Are you creating or are you destroying? And an initiate then looks at what they're doing. Fracking, being with a person of the same gender or other gender, almost anything that they do, they ask themselves, am I creating or am I destroying with what I'm about to do? And with indigenous people, they move that to 7 generations. They'll say, is what I'm doing now, how is it going to impact 7 generations from now? If I cut down these trees, what will that mean? If I build this bridge, if I make this parking lot, what will it mean 7 generations from now? So in a collective culture, initiation is part of what we would call collective culture, where people think in terms of something greater than themselves. They think in terms of circles. They think in terms of how is it going to affect us versus an individualistic culture where the bumper sticker is, I can do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it, or the one with the most toys wins. Those are death cultures. In the moment, yeah, it's a lot of fun to have the hottest car burning the most gas and going the fastest and having a boat, 2 snowmobiles, a lawnmower, and 6 wives. But in the end, how much are you destroying? What are you creating? That's the big question. And I believe that initiated people at the level of one's nature think through those things before they act.
So that sort of touches on the potential challenges for an initiated person, because if they're thinking 7 generations in advance, but the culture around them isn't, then that could potentially be quite a challenge, couldn't it?
Yes. So, Colin, what we know is that initiation is dead in most cultures. I believe what we also know is initiation is going to be what saves us. So we have to start somewhere. So we take a young man like you and we initiate you. We throw you back into bizarro culture. And you go, this doesn't make any sense. It never did. But now it really doesn't, because I understand some things and it's really painful now. So we have to build a system around you to support that. We have to have 6 or 7 others of you in proximity so you can all sit down together and know, wow, this is pretty wacky, but we've learned some new things. And we can't change the world, but what we can change is if each one of us initiates 7 other young boys. And then those 7 young boys initiate 7 other young boys. And it goes like that. So within maybe not your lifetime, surely not mine, but within a few generations, maybe an initiation will come back. That sense of spirit, which is deep connection. Spirituality and religion are 2 different things. You don't have to believe in God, but it's hard not to believe that we're interconnected when we know that when the last tree goes, that's the last thing that's exchanging carbon dioxide into oxygen. We have to know that when we pollute the last bit of water, we're going to die of thirst. So everything is our relative. The lives of all these other things impact our life. So interconnection is a no-brainer. But yet, we're in this culture of thanatos and hypnos. The death culture is all around us. ISIS. You're seeing all of the killing now in the United States. So the vibration of violence. Thanatos' brother is hypnos, sleep. And a lot of Americans, a lot of Westerners are asleep going, well, ISIS is over there, and the violence is over there. I'm a nice person. It's almost like Germany during World War II. I didn't know there were concentration camps, kind of a thing. So what Shadow wants to do is it wants to put people to sleep. And they're saying, well, I'm not doing anything bad. They're not doing anything. And then you have Thanatos, the death culture, then, which can do its work to all the people that are sleeping. The concept of initiation is wake up, observe, look around, see the connections, see the disconnections. So Thanatos and Hypnos doesn't like initiates very much, doesn't like people who do initiation very much. But that's who we're really battling, are these ancient gods, if you will, of Thanatos and Hypnos.
And so, yeah, I mean, as you hinted before, then you need quite a support network for all those initiates to help them with that. So
it's going to take a lot of courage for people like you who've been initiated, and now you're alone in the world, but you're not really alone, but it sure feels alone. But to get other people to work with, to form a circle with, and then continue the work. But what we have to know, what the you and I's have to know, is that we're changing things one person at a time. Sounds like an old hackneyed phrase, but it's really true. I wish we could go out and just, get everybody initiated, but it's not going to happen because people like their toys. They like their individuality. And they're disconnected. They're asleep. And it's waking them up's hard.
And we haven't got the system to support them, even if they did, have we yet? I mean,
that's right.
Chicken and egg almost, isn't it? Yeah.
But once we get into the first schools, the first universities, it becomes part of culture again. And I think what we're looking at is a tipping point. There's got to be a tipping point. What will be, and we're getting close in the United States with sexual assault in colleges. President Obama started a committee, to a blue ribbon committee that's going to look into this. But they didn't have the right people on the board, and all they're doing now, again, is putting all of their time and money into police, into judicial, into tougher laws. They're still dealing with symptoms. That is part of hypnosis, is they put a blinder over your eyes. The root of the root of the root of it is where we have to go. But everybody's afraid. They think that initiation is telling people how to be, and that's not it at all. It's helping people to understand who they are with the faith that 99% of all people really understand deep connection. They just forgot. But you take any little kid and put them in a box of dirt or in a lake, and suddenly you see the smile on their face. They understand. They understand connection. And they don't want to hurt animals. They don't want to hurt water. They want to create things, not destroy things. Yeah. So I think it's an important discussion. And I think it's a very hopeful discussion. And some people would say, well, why don't we just do a 2-week thing? Wouldn't 2 weeks be better than nothing? And the answer is no. No, it wouldn't. Prochaska tells us that. All you can do then is maybe make people think about something they've never thought about. But you aren't giving them the opportunity to embody it. You aren't giving them the opportunity to learn new behaviors, etc. So there are things that must be done correctly. And I don't think there's one way to do it, but there are components to initiation, one being time, one being that it's a process, not an event. A second being that there have to be mentors and family involved with the initiate from the very beginning. You have to have those relationships in place. It has to be physical, spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and social. You can't just focus on the spiritual component or just the physical component. You're really looking at this holistically. And you've got to go through the individual working with themselves, and then with others, and then with nature, and it keeps growing from there. So the indigenous nations have given us outlines of how to do this. I've had elders who've given me sets of symbols and shown me that from ancient times, they've known exactly what needs to be done. How it is done would differ in this time and place, but what needs to be done always remains the same. How you do it is where the creativity comes on our part.
And does that also vary depending on where you do it, in terms of almost what the land wants you to do?
I have to agree. I think if you're in Atlanta, Georgia, or you're in the mountains of Colorado, or in London, or in Glastonbury, you've got to use what's there. You've got to be smart. For example, there's an island off of Massachusetts. It's a beautiful little island. They take kids from the inner city, put them on the island over the summer, and teach them how to farm. And they talk about what it means to be a good man. All of the right things for too short a period of time. But then what they do is they drop them off in a bus, similar to a vet being dropped off after a war, and hey, good luck with that, you know? And suddenly they're back in with their gang or with the people that are selling drugs, whatever it might be, and they're standing there alone with all of this wisdom. But go back to that basic motivation. I want to be a part of something. I don't want to be left behind or treated differently. That kicks in, and then we see the recidivism. So we have to be smart about how we're initiating, where we're initiating, and where we're returning them to. So if you're initiating somebody in Atlanta, then yeah, you would use the cityscape as part of your initiatory field. And you would make sure that you're not getting a kid from Chicago, a kid from LA, a kid from Hartford, and a kid from Atlanta. You know, you need 10 kids from Atlanta that can help each other through that period where they're going from this liminal time of the initiation back to normal time. It's normal time isn't normal anymore. Normal time is pretty abnormal. And we're returning kids who suddenly have been enlightened to darkness. That's hard. That's right.
And those children doing the initiation at Atlanta, say, does it matter that they are perhaps following a process that's from a tradition that's from somewhere else in the world, say a Lakota tradition or whatever? Or is it also needed that we find out what the traditions of Atlanta were in the past and then follow them?
That's a great question. So, for example, like I said, I follow the Lakota tradition, but the initiation process that I've developed doesn't have anything to do with Lakota tradition.
Right.
It has to do with the tradition of being a human being on this earth. So there are some basic components of initiation that are true no matter where you are. Again, the idea of time and mentors and tempering projects and some of these other things. And then where you do that tempering, yes, that's going to vary based if you're in Atlanta or in the mountains. That will change what you do. It'll change if you're dealing with 10-year-olds or 16-year-olds. It would be different if you're dealing with kids who are in school or not in school, whether they're African American or Caucasian. There's a lot of factors that you have to be creative about and work with what you have, as long as you're employing the key parameters. That's my belief anyway.
We've probably got enough stuff now, but I mean, are you happy to carry on a bit longer, or what's your time frame like?
You know, for me, I think that would give people an idea of what this is about. If you wanted to, I can talk about the lore for a second, and and that really is more of the indigenous work. The initiation is as well, but brought into modern times, and the lore is. I could talk about that for a minute if you'd like.
So yeah, tell me a bit about the lore.
Okay. Years ago, in 1992, I believe it was, there was a film called Yaquana, Yakaona, and it was about the meeting of elders down in Brazil at the same time that there was the first environmental summit of the United Nations. And the indigenous peoples of the world were not invited to the summit. So they had their own summit. There were something like 700 different indigenous elders. And Marcos Terena was a man who spoke for all of them. He was given a few minutes in this big forum. And what Marcos Terena said was that we have the technology to change the world, to bring it back, to save the environment, to save the mother, to save the peoples of the world. Do you want that information? Because we're willing to share it with you. And in that film, Yaquana, were a number of different elders from, like I said, around the world. So I really believed Marcos Torena, and I sought him out along with some of the other elders and was able to meet them in upstate New York. And I asked them if they would be willing to co-teach a class with me at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, an engineering institute. And we called it Indigenous Wisdom and Modern Technology. And a number of elders from Yakwana and from different places around the world came and co-taught this class, including Bobby McLeod from Australia. So he lived in our home, and he taught in the class. And he introduced the term lore to me. Death, dead, law, and life lore. And the lore are the basic truths, behaviors, philosophies, actions that any human being can take to assist them in connecting to the world, connecting to themselves, and bringing breath back to Mother Earth. And he had a set of lore that he taught me. And as I worked with Indigenous elders again from around the world since 1992, they are all familiar with that word lore, that they all have this wisdom that they teach their young people that helps them live in this world in a balanced manner. So I've collected probably 200 pieces of lore. And what's interesting is the elders that I've worked with don't hold this to be secret. It's not like it's ceremonial secrets of shamans. This is the basic teachings of how to live a life in this world. And you begin talking about the lore, and people will say, well, I knew that, but I don't practice that, or I've never heard of that, but I have felt that. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do now is to share the lore that I've learned from Indigenous people with other people. Again, it's not Lakota, it's not Dene, it's not, it's everybody's. I have found that a piece of lore, 20 different elders will tell me the same thing with different stories, but they have the same piece of lore. And to see elders, I had 7 or 8 elders in a room together talking about their lore, and they were laughing and smiling. We have that one too, or you have that, that's great, and we call it this. So there are different names for things and different ways they embody it. But the lore is really beautiful. Can it be part of initiation? Of course. But it also is standalone information that is really enjoyable for people to hear, and they can bring it into their life immediately because it is so understandable. It's not, if you were to write a book on lore and it appeared in a New Age section, that would be a major mortal sin. It really should be under ancient traditions, because this is what it is really old traditions that if they were practiced in this day and age, half of the problems of this earth would disappear pretty quickly. And that's not an exaggeration. When people hear the lore, they'll understand how they can change their own life, and mindfulness and the lore can make a big difference in people's lives and people's lives around them and in the nature that's around them. Yeah. So that's another thing I'd like to share with people if they're interested.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.